We were sitting around the grand mahogany dining table, the exact same table I had paid $5,000 to have meticulously restored just last year when my father complained about the wood losing its natural luster. The crystal wine glasses clinked together in a cheerful toast, reflecting the warm, golden light of the imported chandelier overhead. My mother, Blair, had spared no expense for this Friday night dinner. The smell of roasted lamb, expensive herbs, and rich red wine filled the room, creating an atmosphere of overwhelming luxury. She had hired a private chef for the evening, likely because my younger sister, Fallon, had brought her incredibly wealthy friend Keely over. Everything had to look pristine. Everything had to scream generational wealth and effortless class. But as I sat there, picking at the expensive food on my porcelain plate, all I could taste was exhaustion. I had just come off a grueling 14-hour shift at the commercial fleet leasing yard. Despite scrubbing my hands twice with industrial soap in the employee restroom before driving here, I could still catch the faint, lingering scent of diesel fuel and engine grease on my skin. I was 32 years old, the regional director of the leasing division. I was the one who kept the massive logistical trucks running, the one who negotiated fleet contracts, the one who navigated the gritty, unglamorous reality of the transportation industry. It was hard, relentless work. But in this beautiful, fragrant dining room, I was nothing more than an invisible ghost. I was the silent, unappreciated solution to every single financial problem this family encountered. Across the table, Fallon was holding court, as she always did. She flipped her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder, laughing loudly and dramatically at something Keely had just said. Fallon called herself a luxury lifestyle public relations consultant. She had business cards printed on thick, embossed paper and an Instagram feed that looked like a travel magazine. In reality, she was a 28-year-old woman who spent her days taking aesthetic photos in high-end cafes and her nights swiping credit cards that were firmly attached to my personal bank account. She generated no real income, but she generated a massive amount of expenses. The conversation shifted to the struggles of maintaining a high society image. Fallon sighed heavily, swirling her expensive wine in her glass, playing the part of the exhausted socialite. She leaned in toward Keely, shaking her head with a look of profound burden. "It is just so exhausting carrying the weight of everyone else around me," Fallon complained, her voice dripping with artificial weariness. She then turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine across the table. Her gaze narrowed, and that familiar, mocking glint appeared in her eyes. "Honestly, Keely, I tell my parents all the time. We need to trim the fat around here. Let's get rid of the useless people in this family. You're first, Maeve." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Useless. First. I froze, my silver fork hovering inches above my plate. My heart stopped beating for a fraction of a second. I waited for the inevitable reprimand. I waited for my father, Declan, to slam his hand on the table, clear his throat, and tell her to watch her disrespectful mouth. I waited for my mother to step in and defend the eldest daughter, who had literally kept the roof over their heads for the past 4 years. I waited for someone, anyone, to acknowledge the insanity of what had just been said. Instead, my father let out a booming, hearty laugh. He reached over with the wine bottle and generously poured Fallon another glass. "She has a point, Maeve," he chuckled, his face flushed with alcohol and amusement. "You have to admit, you do not exactly fit into the aesthetic we are trying to build around here. You always look so worn out." My mother smiled softly, a gentle, enabling smile, as she patted Fallon's hand affectionately. "Oh, Declan, leave your sister alone, Fallon. She cannot help that she lacks our refined tastes. She works in a parking lot, for heaven's sake. Honestly, all she is really good for is her money anyway. Speaking of which, Maeve, dear, I need you to handle the caterer's invoice for next week's country club summer mixer. It is only about $3,000. Just wire it to my checking account by Monday morning, would you?" They laughed. A chorus of casual, comfortable cruelty. The anger that hit me in that exact moment was not loud. It was not a fiery, screaming explosion of rage. It was cold. Ice cold. It was the sudden, shocking realization that I was bleeding out for people who were genuinely annoyed that my blood was staining their expensive designer shoes. What was at stake here was no longer just my savings account or my credit score. It was my dignity. It was my sanity. It was my fundamental right to exist as a human being rather than an automated teller machine. I looked down at my hands. They were calloused, strong, and capable. They were the hands of a fiercely independent woman. Then I looked up at Fallon's wrist, adorned with the shining gold Rolex watch I had purchased for her last birthday because my parents had literally begged me to keep up appearances for her fake business. "You know what?" I said. My voice was dangerously quiet, cutting through the ambient noise of the room. The laughter at the table slowly died down. Keely looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. I stood up slowly, deliberately, placing my linen napkin meticulously next to my untouched plate. I reached into my leather purse, pulled out the sleek metallic secondary credit card I had given my mother for severe emergencies, and dropped it right into the center of the table. It landed with a sharp, echoing clack against the polished wood. "You are right, Fallon," I whispered, staring dead into my sister's widened eyes. "Let's get rid of the useless people. Let's start the cleanup right now." My mother frowned, her perfectly manicured brows drawing together in genuine confusion. "Maeve, what on earth are you talking about? Sit down, you're embarrassing us in front of Keely. You are being entirely too dramatic over a simple joke." I did not sit down. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. The air in the room had shifted, growing incredibly heavy with a sudden, unspoken tension. They were so used to me taking the insults, bowing my head in silent obedience, and quietly writing the checks to keep the peace. They were not used to me standing up. They were certainly not used to me walking away. I turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the heavy oak front door. My father called out my name, his tone shifting rapidly from amused to intensely annoyed. "Maeve, get back here right now." I did not look back. I stepped out into the cool evening air, the sound of their confused and angry murmurs fading behind me as the heavy door clicked shut. As I walked down the long, sweeping driveway that I paid the landscaping fees for, a strange, terrifying sense of freedom washed over me. I climbed into my car, gripped the steering wheel tight, and let out a long, trembling breath I felt I had been holding for a decade. The countdown to their destruction had officially begun. How fast would their perfect world burn down when the useless person stopped paying for the water? Driving home that night, the vibrant city lights blurred into long streaks of gold and neon red against the dark windshield. The silence inside my car was deafening, leaving far too much room for the suppressed memories to flood back into my conscious mind. It is a funny, tragic thing how the human mind works when the illusion of family loyalty finally shatters. When you finally stop making endless excuses for toxic family members, the past stops looking like a series of unfortunate, accidental misunderstandings. Instead, it starts looking like a very deliberate, carefully curated museum of your own pain. I was walking through the exhibits of my own lifelong exploitation, and every single memory made my grip on the steering wheel tighter and my resolve colder. Exhibit A in this museum of misery was my college graduation. I had worked 2 grueling jobs throughout my entire university career, taking overnight shifts at a dusty, dangerous impound lot just to pay my tuition and avoid student loans. I never asked my parents for a single dime. When the day of the commencement ceremony finally arrived, I sat in the sprawling outdoor stadium in my cheap, rented cap and gown. I was surrounded by thousands of joyful families holding giant balloons, vibrant flower bouquets, and cheering loudly for their children. I kept checking my phone, refreshing my messages over and over, waiting for a text, a call, any sign that they were in the crowd. Nothing came. The ceremony ended, and I walked back to my dorm alone. Later that evening, while eating cold leftover pizza in a silent room, I opened social media and found out the truth. My parents had flown to Miami. Why? Because Fallon was feeling stressed about turning 21 and felt she desperately needed a weekend getaway. They threw her a lavish yacht party. When I confronted them weeks later, my mother simply waved her hand in that dismissive way of hers. "Oh, Maeve, you always manage on your own." You're so independent. Fallon is fragile. She needs us more. You're the strong one. Strong. It is the universal family code word for the child whose feelings simply do not matter and whose achievements require no celebration. Exhibit B was the hospital bill. For years ago, I suffered a sudden, life-threatening ruptured appendix. The pain was agonizing, blindingly intense. I was rushed into emergency surgery in the middle of the night. I woke up hours later in a sterile, freezing, brightly lit hospital room with absolutely no one by my side. I called my parents, groggy from the anesthesia and terrified. My father answered, sounding sleepy, and promised they would come right over as soon as the sun came up. They never showed up. 2 days later, while I was still hooked up to an intravenous drip and struggling to sit up, I received an automated fraud alert from my bank. The backup Platinum credit card I kept hidden at my parents' house for genuine family emergencies had been maxed out. $7,000 charged to an exclusive, all-inclusive luxury resort in Cancun, Mexico. Fallon had decided the stress of my sudden hospitalization was simply too much for her delicate nerves to handle, and she needed a tropical beach vacation to recover from the trauma of her sister being in surgery. When I called my father, crying in pain and betrayal, asking how he could let her steal from me while I was bleeding in a hospital bed, he sighed heavily into the phone. She is just a kid, Maeve. Do not make a huge deal out of it. You make great money at that truck leasing place. Just pay it off over a few months. Family helps family. And then there was Exhibit C, the absolute crown jewel of their betrayal. The loan. 3 years ago, Declan's grand dream of an early, luxurious retirement turned into a terrifying nightmare when he made a series of incredibly arrogant and terrible investments. He was facing imminent bankruptcy. He called me into his dark, oak-paneled study, broke down in actual tears, and begged for my financial rescue. He told me he would lose the beautiful house, the prestigious country club membership, and his pride in the community. I felt a surge of daughterly duty. I emptied my entire life savings, $50,000, wired directly to his aggressive creditors to save him from total financial ruin. He hugged me tightly, called me his savior, his wonderful girl, and promised to pay me back every single cent. But barely a month later, during a large family dinner with our extended relatives, an aunt asked me what I was doing for a living these days. Before I could even open my mouth to explain my promotion to regional director, my father cut in with a dismissive, arrogant smirk. Oh, she works down at the leasing yards with the grease monkeys. It is a humble living, mostly manual labor stuff. Not everyone is cut out for the sophisticated corporate world like our Fallon. I had just handed this man $50,000 of my hard-earned money to save him from living on the street, and he still treated me like the embarrassing dirt under his polished shoes in front of our entire family. For years, I had swallowed these bitter insults. I rationalized their toxic behavior. I convinced myself that being the financial pillar of the family meant I inherently had value. I thought if I just paid enough bills, fixed enough disasters, and solved enough of their problems, they would eventually look at me with the exact same unconditional adoration they showered upon Fallon. But tonight, that pathetic illusion finally shattered into a million unfixable pieces. I was not their beloved daughter. I was their safety net. I was their permanent scapegoat. I was their endless ATM. I pulled into my secure apartment complex, parked in my designated spot, and turned off the engine. The dashboard went dark, leaving me in the quiet shadows of the garage. I pulled out my phone and opened my secure banking application. I stared at the numbers glowing brightly on the screen. Over the past 4 years, between the generous monthly allowances, the constant emergency bailouts, the maxed-out credit card bills, and the hidden mortgage supplements, I had transferred over $340,000 to them. $340,000. That was the staggering price of their conditional affection. That was the exact cost of being called a useless person. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest, and a slow, bitter smile crept onto my face. I was so incredibly tired of playing the strong, silent, reliable provider for a family that clearly hated me. They wanted to see what a useless person actually looked like. I was going to show them. I was going to give them a front row seat to their own financial apocalypse. Are you ready to see what happens when the loyal scapegoat finally decides to bite back and burn the pasture to the ground? The next morning, I woke up feeling dangerously clear-headed. There was no emotional hangover of guilt, no lingering, desperate urge to call my mother and apologize for walking out and ruining their perfect dinner party. Instead, there was just a cold, sharp, and highly methodical focus taking over my mind. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a strong cup of black coffee, and sat down at the granite island, watching the bustling city wake up through my floor-to-ceiling window. The sky was clear, and my conscience was even clearer. At exactly 8 in the morning, my phone began to buzz aggressively on the counter. The caller ID flashed with the name of Aunt Naomi, my mother's older sister. Naomi was the ultimate flying monkey of our family dynamic, a bitter, wealthy woman who thrived on manufacturing family drama and took immense pleasure in judging everyone from her high horse. If my parents were the lead architects of my lifelong misery, Naomi was their most dedicated and vocal contractor. I took a deep breath, answered the call, and put it on speakerphone, setting the device down next to my coffee mug. Maeve, Naomi barked immediately, entirely skipping any form of standard morning greeting. What on earth is wrong with your brain? Your mother called me in absolute tears last night. She said you threw a massive, childish tantrum in front of Fallon's very important business friend and stormed out of the house like a spoiled brat. Do you have any idea how deeply embarrassing that is for your poor sister? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot coffee. Aunt Naomi, were you physically present at the dinner table last night? Did you happen to hear the exact words Fallon used to describe me? Oh, please, stop playing the victim. It is exhausting, she scoffed loudly, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. Fallon is under a massive amount of pressure building her luxury PR brand from the ground up. She speaks without thinking sometimes when she is stressed, you know that perfectly well. You are the older sister. You are supposed to be the mature one, not a sensitive, jealous brat. Now listen to me very carefully. Fallon is deeply humiliated. Keely thinks your family is unstable. Fallon desperately needs to host a redemption dinner for Keely's elite social circle this weekend to save her professional face. You need to wire her $15,000 by noon today to cover the premium catering, the floral arrangements, and the venue rentals. It is the very least you can do after intentionally ruining her evening and jeopardizing her career. I stared at the phone, truly marveling at the sheer insanity radiating from the speaker. $15,000. Because I got horribly insulted in my own parents' home, I was now expected to pay a $15,000 financial penalty to the exact person who insulted me. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this family was genuinely staggering. I am not sending her a single dime, Naomi, I said, keeping my voice incredibly even and void of any emotion. Naomi gasped loudly, a sharp, dramatic intake of breath sounding like I had just physically slapped her across the face. Excuse me? Listen here, little girl. You might make decent money playing around with your dirty little trucks, but you owe this family your life. You owe your parents everything for raising you and putting up with your difficult personality. If you do not send that money right now, you are going to be cut out of this family faster than you can blink. We will disown you. Promises, promises, I muttered dryly and reached out to press the red end call button. Less than a minute later, a new voice message popped up on my screen from Fallon. I tapped play, leaning back in my chair. Her voice was shrill, panicked, and laced with an ugly, demanding entitlement that made my skin crawl. Maeve, you better wire that money into my account right this second. Stop being a pathetic, selfish, jealous loser. Keely thinks we are fighting now, and it is ruining my perfect aesthetic image. Fix this right now, or I swear to God, I will make sure Dad never speaks to you again and you are banned from the house. I calmly deleted the voice message. The entitlement was suffocating, but rather than hurting me, it only poured premium gasoline on the fire burning in my chest. Just as I was putting my phone down to wash my mug, it rang again. This time, the screen showed Uncle Hayes, my father's younger brother. Hayes was the designated black sheep of the older generation. He owned a small, gritty mechanic shop on the industrial outskirts of town, a man with permanent grease under his fingernails, a loud laugh, and zero tolerance for country club nonsense. He was the only person in the entire extended family who ever treated me like a respectable human being, probably because we were both considered the blue-collar disappointments of the Whitmore bloodline. "Hey, kiddo," Hayes said, his voice gruff but undeniably warm. "Heard through the grapevine you caused quite a stir at the royal palace last night." "Word travels fast in this kingdom," I sighed, rubbing my temples to ward off a headache. "Naomi just called and demanded I pay a $15,000 fine for hurting Fallon's fragile feelings." Hayes let out a low, rumbling laugh that sounded exactly like a heavy diesel engine turning over. "Sounds about right for that crew." "Listen, Maeve, I am not calling to lecture you or tell you to apologize. I am calling to warn you about something. I was out at the country club yesterday afternoon fixing the busted alternator on your dad's customized golf cart. I happened to overhear Declan and Blair talking to some of their snooty, high society friends on the patio." "Talking about what?" I asked, a sudden, heavy sinking feeling developing in my gut. "The house," Hayes said softly, the humor leaving his voice entirely. Declan was bragging to everyone who would listen. He told his golf buddies that Fallon bought the huge estate for them. He said her PR business is booming so massively that she paid off their entire mortgage in cash and is taking care of them in their old age. He practically called you a useless freeloader who just borrows their cars and eats their food. My blood ran instantly cold. The house. For years ago, when Declan was drowning in terrible debt, he had secretly taken out a massive, high-interest second mortgage on the estate. When he inevitably defaulted, the bank was moving to foreclose and evict them. To save them from public humiliation, I had quietly utilized my extensive commercial banking connections and had an asset management firm, which I secretly owned a 90% majority stake in, legally by the distressed debt. I was technically, legally, their landlord. I paid the annual property taxes. I paid the expensive roof maintenance. And they were walking around telling the whole world that Fallon, the girl who could not afford a decent cup of coffee without my platinum credit card, was their generous savior. "They told people Fallon bought it?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "Yeah, kid," Hayes sighed deeply. "They're living in a complete fantasy world, Maeve. And they're using your blood, sweat, and tears to build the castle walls. You need to cut the cord. Cut it right now, before they bleed you totally dry and leave you with nothing." "Thanks, Uncle Hayes," I said, my voice hardening into solid steel. "I am getting the sharpest scissors ready right now." I hung up the phone. The initial shock had fully passed, leaving behind a pristine, razor-sharp clarity that felt almost euphoric. They really thought they owned me. They thought my money was just a natural, endless resource they had the divine right to mine forever while spitting on the miner. They were about to find out exactly who owned who. I opened my laptop, pulled up my financial directory, and started drafting an urgent email to my wealth manager. How fast do you think a massive house of cards collapses when you violently pull out the foundation? I picked up my phone and called into the Central Dispatch Center, telling my executive assistant I was taking 2 days of emergency personal leave. It was the first time in 3 straight years I had called out of work, but today I had a vastly different kind of fleet to dismantle. I walked into my bedroom and changed into a sharp, tailored black designer suit. I wanted to look exactly like the ruthless, successful corporate businesswoman they constantly claimed I was not. I wanted my armor on. By 10 in the morning, I was sitting in the plush, mahogany-paneled corner office of Quinton, the senior branch manager of my primary financial institution and my dedicated personal wealth advisor. Quinton was a stern, highly intelligent man in his late 50s, meticulously organized and fiercely protective of his high-net-worth clients. Over the years, he had watched with quiet, professional disapproval as I authorized transfer after massive transfer to my family's checking accounts. He never overstepped, but I always knew he hated watching me drain my assets for them. I slid a thick, heavy manila folder across his polished desk. "Quinton, I need to make some significant changes to my portfolio. Immediately. Today." Quinton adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the folder. He reviewed the highlighted documents, his eyebrows slowly inching higher and higher up his forehead as he read. He looked up at me, his expression deadly serious. Maeve, are you entirely certain about this course of action? If we execute these specific orders today, we are talking about a complete, irreversible financial severance. I am looking at the joint emergency reserve accounts, the 3 secondary platinum credit cards, the auto-pay system for the property taxes on the estate, and the standing wire order for the $15,000 monthly allowance to your father's primary checking account. I am certain, I said, my voice remarkably steady and cold. Cut them all. Quentin took off his glasses and leaned forward, clasping his hands tightly together on the desk. Maeve, as your fiduciary advisor, I need to explicitly warn you of the immediate fallout. The 3 credit cards are currently carrying rolling balances nearing their $25,000 maximum limits. Once you legally remove yourself as the primary guarantor, the liability shifts entirely to the secondary cardholders if they attempt to continue use. But more importantly, because they do not have the verified personal income to support these massive credit lines, the cards will be immediately frozen by the fraud department. If you stop the monthly cash transfers, their checking accounts will likely overdraw within a matter of days given their lavish spending habits. If you pull your name off these guarantor forms, they will be facing severe financial default in under 48 hours. I looked out the large, floor-to-ceiling glass window of his office, watching the busy, chaotic street below. People rushing to work, earning their living. That is not a default, Quentin, I said softly, turning my gaze back to him. That is just returning them to their actual, true market value. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of Quentin's stern mouth. He understood. Very well. Let us begin the liquidation process. For the next 2 solid hours, we methodically severed every single financial artery that kept my family's fake luxury lifestyle breathing. I signed document after document, initialing page after page. With every stroke of the heavy ink pen, a massive physical weight lifted off my shoulders. I permanently canceled the auto-pay for my mother's exclusive country club membership. I legally removed my financial backing from my father's leased, customized golf cart. I froze the 3 platinum credit cards, locking them out permanently from my credit line. I canceled the $15,000 monthly wire transfer, effective immediately. There is one more major thing, I said, sliding a final, crisp piece of paper toward him. The asset management firm. M Logistics Capital. The corporate entity that holds the deed to their house. Quentin nodded slowly, his sharp eyes scanning the legal paper. Yes. The holding company you established specifically to purchase their distressed mortgage from the previous lender. They are currently legally renting the property from your firm, though I note here in the ledger you have never actually collected a single cent of rent from them in 4 years. That changes today, I said, feeling a dark, powerful sense of satisfaction settle deep in my chest. I want an official, legally binding notice of rental arrears drawn up immediately. I want it sent by certified courier mail this afternoon. If they want to live in a mansion they proudly claim Fallon bought, they can start paying the current market rate for it. Send the formal notice directly to my father, requiring signature upon delivery. Quentin stamped the final document with a loud, authoritative, satisfying thud. It is done, Maeve. The severance is legally complete. By early this afternoon, every banking system will update globally. Their luxury cards will be declined at the point of sale. Their auto payments will bounce due to insufficient funds. The safety net is officially gone. I stood up, smoothing my suit jacket, and shook Quentin's hand firmly. Thank you, Quentin. For everything. Good luck, Maeve, he said quietly, a look of genuine respect in his eyes. Stay strong against the backlash. I walked out of the quiet, air-conditioned bank and out into the bright, blinding midday sun. The city air tasted sweeter, cleaner. The crushing burden of being the good, obedient, useful daughter was finally gone, replaced by the thrilling, electric anticipation of pure justice. Every signature I just made was a heavy steel door slamming shut and locking. The financial bombs were planted, the timers were ticking down rapidly, and all I had to do now was sit back and wait for the spectacular explosions. The rest of the afternoon stretched out in a strange, surreal, almost dreamlike quiet. The silence radiating from my phone was deafening. My family was so accustomed to me caving in by noon after any argument. Usually, by this time of day, I would have sent a long, groveling, apologetic text message, followed closely by a large wire transfer to quickly smooth things over and buy my way back into their good graces. They were probably sitting in their sprawling, sunlit living room right now, sipping iced tea, laughing together about how I was just throwing a pathetic little tantrum and would come crawling back with my checkbook wide open by dinner time. I needed to stay incredibly grounded. I could not sit alone in my apartment and let the silence play tricks on my mind. I drove my car to one of my company's massive secondary maintenance yards on the edge of the city. The familiar, harsh scent of dark engine grease, hot summer asphalt, and heavy diesel fuel hit me the second I stepped out of the vehicle. This was my real world. These massive, towering commercial trucks, the burly mechanics shouting to each other over the deafening roar of revving engines, the dirt, the sweat, and the grime. This was exactly where my money came from. Every single dollar my family casually swiped for expensive champagne and European designer bags was earned right here, in the dirt, by the useless daughter they were so profoundly embarrassed by. I walked the long concrete line, inspecting a row of newly leased industrial vehicles, chatting easily with the yard manager about maintenance schedules and tire rotations. The harsh physical reality of the active yard helped push down the lingering, annoying ghosts of guilt. Because that is the truly insidious thing about deeply toxic families, they condition you so incredibly well from childhood that even when you are finally defending yourself from their abuse, you feel like you are committing a horrible crime against nature. A tiny, nagging voice in the back of my head kept whispering, "Are you being too harsh? They are your parents. She is your sister. You have plenty of money." But then I looked down at the rough calluses on my palms. I thought about the Cancun vacation pictures on social media while I was bleeding and terrified in a sterile hospital bed. I thought about the $50,000 rescue funds and the cruel mockery about grease monkeys that followed just weeks later. I mentally crushed that tiny voice of guilt until it was nothing but fine dust blowing in the wind. At exactly 2:14 in the afternoon, my phone chirped loudly in my pocket. It was an automated SMS alert from the banking application. I had deliberately set up instant notifications for any attempted transactions on the frozen cards before I fully deactivated my administrative access, just so I could personally monitor the fallout in real time. I pulled the phone from my pocket, the screen glaring in the sunlight. Transaction declined. Platinum card ending in 4092. Amount: $5,000. Merchant: Hermes Boutique, downtown. I stared down at the bright screen, a genuine, loud laugh bubbling up from deep in my chest. Fallon. She was actually trying to drop $5,000 on a luxury handbag less than 24 hours after telling me to my face that I was useless and aggressively demanding $15,000 for a party. She honestly thought she could just go on a massive shopping spree on my dime to soothe her slightly bruised ego. A few seconds later, another alert popped up on the screen. Transaction declined. Platinum card ending in 4092. Amount: $5,000. Merchant: Hermes Boutique, downtown. Reason: account frozen. She had actually tried to swipe it twice. I could picture the scene perfectly in my mind. Fallon standing at the pristine glass counter, her face turning bright red as the polished, polite sales associate apologetically handed the metal card back to her in front of other wealthy customers. The sheer, crushing embarrassment she must be feeling right now in front of the elite socialites she so desperately wanted to impress. The perfect PR facade was cracking wide open. Then came the third alert, but this one was from a different account entirely. Insufficient funds. Auto transfer to Riverside Country Club. Amount: $1,200. Account: Declan Primary Checking. Because I had permanently canceled the massive monthly deposit that morning, my father's primary checking account had just forcefully bounced his monthly country club membership dues. The heavy dominoes were officially starting to fall. The fake, glittering empire built entirely on my sweat was crumbling to the ground in real time. I leaned my back against the massive, thick tire of an 18-wheeler, the hot afternoon sun beating down on my face. The hunt had officially begun. How long do you think it takes for profound entitlement to curdle and turn into sheer, unfiltered panic? The storm officially broke exactly 10 minutes later. My phone began to vibrate violently and relentlessly in my pocket. I did not even need to look at the screen to know exactly who it was. The barrage of missed calls came in rapid, desperate succession. 3 missed calls from Fallon. 2 missed calls from my mother. 5 missed calls from my father. They were finally realizing that the family ATM was not just temporarily out of order, it had been entirely repossessed and removed from the premises. I let it ring. I walked slowly into the yard supervisor's air-conditioned, slightly messy office, poured myself a cup of cheap, bitter breakroom coffee in a styrofoam cup, and sat back in the worn leather desk chair. I watched my phone screen light up over and over again. It was a truly fascinating psychological experiment, watching their stages of grief manifest rapidly through a series of missed calls. First came the confusion, then the intense frustration, and now the outright, undeniable panic. Finally, a long text message pushed through from my mother. Maeve, the bank system is glitching terribly. Fallon's card was just declined at the boutique and your father just got an incredibly embarrassing call from the country club treasurer about missed dues. Call Quentin at the bank and fix this immediately before it causes a scene. She still honestly thought it was a technical mistake. She still could not fathom a universe where I would deliberately and purposefully cut them off from my wealth. I took a slow sip of my bitter coffee, typed back a single, decisive sentence, and hit send. Not a glitch. 30 seconds later, the phone rang again. It was Declan. I decided it was finally time to face the music. I hit the green accept button and brought the phone to my ear. Maeve. My father bellowed into the receiver, his voice echoing loudly in the small office even without the speakerphone turned on. He was furiously angry, the kind of red-faced, sputtering, vein-popping rage he usually reserved for incompetent waiters or bad drivers. What the hell is going on here? I just got off the phone with Quentin at the bank, and he gave me some ridiculous runaround nonsense about guarantor authorizations being permanently revoked. Turn the credit cards back on right now. Do you have any earthly idea how deeply humiliating it was for Fallon at the boutique today? I imagine it was roughly as humiliating as being called useless in front of a guest while I was paying for the expensive dinner you were eating, I replied, my voice dangerously calm, completely devoid of any heated emotion. Declan stammered, clearly caught off guard by my icy, unwavering tone. Are you actually doing this on purpose? Over a stupid little joke at dinner? Have you completely lost your mind, Maeve? You cannot just pull the plug on us like this. You are acting like a petulant, spoiled child. A child? I echoed, feeling the cold, hard fury crystallize in my veins. No, Dad. I am acting like a smart business owner who is finally liquidating a terrible, sinking investment. You all made it very clear last night that my presence in this family is nothing but a burden. Fallon said we should get rid of the useless people. I agreed with her assessment. I am just cleaning house. You listen to me, Declan growled, dropping the thin pretense of fatherly disappointment and shifting straight into aggressive intimidation. You owe us. We gave you life. We raised you in a good home. You will call Quentin and fix this right now, or I swear to God, you are no longer a part of this family. I let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet office. Dad, you cannot fire someone who just quit. The bank accounts stay closed permanently. The monthly transfers are done forever. My money is finally seeing you all for what you truly are, useless. I hung up the phone before he could even draw a breath to respond. My heart was pounding hard against my ribs, not out of fear, but out of a massive, electric surge of pure adrenaline. I had done it. The heavy iron chain was broken. Hey them mot loy kugoy hondong non gon de cam on nuoi zem de theodoi, you ka ho ben luan I'm win, vada cap rang du la ky huriang qua en hung con jia de zem toi tande vada cap rang toi se the tim ba se tra loy moi ben luan ko tu qua. I'm win. The phone screen lit up once again. It was Fallon. I calmly rejected the incoming call. Then came a long text message from her, desperate, vicious, and venomous. You think you are so incredibly smart. You think you can embarrass me in public? Mom and Dad are furious with you. We are having a massive family barbecue this Sunday with Aunt Naomi and the rest of the relatives. Dad says if you don't show up, apologize on your knees, and fix the cards, you are dead to us. We will tell everyone exactly what a selfish, greedy, psychotic person you are. I stared down at the glowing message. They were cornered, desperate animals, and their immediate instinct was to publicly shame me into total submission. They wanted to drag me in front of the extended family, the ultimate gathering of flying monkeys, to tear me down and forcefully bully me back into financial compliance. They honestly thought a public execution of my character would make me cry and open my wallet. I typed my reply slowly, savoring every single letter. I will be there. I will bring dessert. I locked my phone and stood up from the desk. They wanted a dramatic show? They wanted to expose me in front of the whole family? Fine. I would give them a spectacular performance they would never, ever forget. Because what they did not know was that I was not coming to apologize. I was coming to burn their fake empire to the ground. Sunday afternoon arrived with a blistering, bright sun that felt entirely inappropriate for the absolute execution I was about to perform. I drove my modest sedan up the long, winding, impeccably paved driveway of the estate. The expansive green lawns were perfectly manicured, a landscaping service that automatically billed my corporate account $800 every single month. The irony of it all was thick enough to cut with a knife. They were hosting a massive family gathering to publicly execute my character, using a pristine backdrop that I had entirely funded. I parked my car near the massive iron gates, taking a deep, stabilizing breath before stepping out. The air was thick with the rich, mouth-watering scent of smoked brisket and expensive cedar wood burning in the massive custom grill. As I walked around the side of the sprawling brick house toward the backyard patio, I could hear the loud, boisterous chatter of my extended family. The flying monkeys had gathered in full force. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and various family friends were standing around holding crystal glasses filled with imported champagne, laughing and enjoying the luxurious lifestyle they all believed my father had built from the ground up. When I stepped onto the stone patio, the vibrant chatter did not stop immediately. It died down slowly, like a wave crashing and retreating into the sand. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. The collective judgment of the Whitmore family was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Sitting in the center of the patio, perfectly positioned on a plush outdoor sofa, was Fallon. She was wearing a stunning white linen designer dress, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the traumatized, abused younger sister to absolute perfection. My mother, Blair, immediately stopped pouring drinks and glared at me. Her face tightened with a mixture of rage and profound embarrassment. Declan, my father, stood next to the grill, holding a pair of silver tongs like a weapon, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. But it was Aunt Naomi who made the first move. She marched across the patio, her heels clicking aggressively against the stone. She stopped mere inches from my face, pointing a sharp, manicured finger directly at my chest. "How dare you show your face here after what you did to your sister," Naomi hissed, her voice loud enough for the entire garden to hear. The remaining whispers fell dead silent. Everyone was watching the show. "You are a spiteful, jealous, deeply disturbed woman, Maeve. Fallon has been crying for 2 solid days. She told us everything. She told us how you tried to steal her business funds out of pure, malicious jealousy because you are stuck working in a filthy truck yard while she is building a massive public relations empire." I looked past Naomi's aggressively pointed finger and locked eyes with Fallon. Fallon let out a dramatic, trembling sob, burying her face in her hands while a cousin rubbed her back comfortingly. She had actually spun a narrative that I was stealing from her. The sheer, pathological delusion of it was almost impressive. "You need to apologize to her right now," Naomi demanded, her voice echoing off the brick walls of the house. "You will get on your knees, you will beg for her forgiveness, and you will return the money you froze, or you can turn around, walk down that driveway, and never consider yourself a part of this family again." I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not offer a single word of defense or apology. I just stood there in the center of the patio, surrounded by dozens of people who looked at me like I was a repulsive insect that had crawled onto their expensive outdoor rug. Over by the garden gate, I saw Uncle Hayes leaning against a stone pillar. He was holding a cheap beer, watching me intensely, giving me a slow, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. He knew the storm was coming. I reached into my oversized leather tote bag and pulled out a massive, heavy, thick manila folder. I held it up in the sunlight. My mother let out a sharp, mocking scoff, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "What is that, Maeve?" she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "What ridiculous papers are you trying to show us? Are you going to show us a psychiatric evaluation? A certificate proving you have finally lost your mind?" I smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that did not reach my eyes. "No, Mother," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent patio, ensuring every single aunt, uncle, and cousin could hear every syllable. "This is not a medical record. This is the birth certificate of Fallon's fake career." I unclasped the heavy folder and pulled out a thick stack of bank statements, credit card ledgers, and verified wire transfer receipts. I had Quinton print everything on official bank letterhead, fully notarized and stamped. There was no room for denial. There was no room for manipulation. There was only the cold, hard, undisputed truth written in black ink. I did not hand the papers to my parents. I walked straight past Aunt Naomi and handed the first stack directly to my cousin Sarah, the biggest gossip in the entire family. I handed another stack to Uncle Robert. I tossed a third stack right onto the glass coffee table in front of Fallon. "What the hell are you doing?" Declan roared, dropping his grill tongs. The metal clattered loudly against the stone. He lunged forward to grab the papers, but Uncle Hayes stepped smoothly out of the shadows and blocked his path, putting a heavy, grease-stained hand on Declan's chest. "Let the girl speak, Declan," Hayes rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. I turned back to the crowd. Everyone was staring down at the papers in their hands, their eyes scanning the highlighted lines. The confusion on their faces was slowly melting into utter, profound shock. "Let us talk about stealing," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the garden. "Aunt Naomi, you're wearing a beautiful floral silk dress today. It looks incredibly expensive. In fact, it cost $800. If you look at page 4 of that packet, you will see the exact charge from the boutique, placed on a platinum card that I personally guarantee, paid from my personal checking account." Naomi's mouth dropped open. She looked down at her dress, then down at the paper, her face draining of all color. She looked like she was going to be physically sick. "And this gorgeous family barbecue?" I continued, gesturing to the lavish spread of food and expensive alcohol. "The premium brisket, the imported champagne, the rented outdoor furniture, paid for by a $3,000 wire transfer I sent to my mother last month. Every sip of wine you are drinking right now was bought with the money I earn working in that filthy truck yard." The crowd began to murmur. People awkwardly set their champagne glasses down on tables, suddenly feeling like the crystal was burning their hands. Fallon leaped up from the sofa, her face bright red with panic. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is lying," she screamed, her voice cracking. "These are fake. She forged these documents because she is obsessed with ruining my life. I earn my own money. I have luxury clients." I looked at my younger sister, feeling nothing but profound pity for the pathetic corner she had backed herself into. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I connected it via Bluetooth to the massive outdoor sound system my father had installed last summer, another item I had quietly paid off. "You earn your own money?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. I tapped the screen. "Let us listen to a voicemail you left me 3 days ago, Fallon." The speakers crackled to life, and Fallon's shrill, demanding voice blasted across the entire estate, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Maeve, you better wire that $15,000 into my account right this second. Stop being a pathetic, selfish, jealous loser. Keely thinks we are fighting now, and it is ruining my perfect aesthetic image. Fix this right now, or I swear to God, I will make sure Dad never speaks to you again." I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it could crush the stone patio into dust. $15,000, I said softly. That was the monthly allowance I have been paying to keep the lights on in this house and to fund Fallon's imaginary public relations firm. Over the past 4 years, I have transferred exactly $340,000 into this family. And in return, I was told at dinner on Friday that I was useless. I was told that I was the fat that needed to be trimmed. I looked around at my relatives. The flying monkeys were entirely grounded. Aunt Naomi was staring at the ground, utterly humiliated. The cousins were whispering furiously to each other, looking at Fallon and my parents with sheer disgust. The illusion of the wealthy, successful Whitmore family was shattered into a million unfixable pieces. My mother, Blair, started crying real tears now. "Maeve, please," she whimpered, stepping toward me with her hands outstretched. "We can talk about this inside. Please, do not do this in front of everyone." I stepped back, out of her reach. "There is nothing left to talk about, Mother. The useless person is officially resigning from her position." The garden was dead silent, save for the sound of Fallon hyperventilating on the sofa. But I was not entirely finished. I turned slowly and looked out toward the front driveway, where Fallon's gleaming, massive luxury SUV was parked directly on the pristine grass, intentionally displayed for everyone to admire. Just as I locked my eyes on the vehicle, the heavy, unmistakable sound of grinding air brakes echoed down the street. A massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck, painted in the bright yellow and black colors of my leasing company, turned slowly into the grand driveway. Its amber warning lights were flashing brightly, casting a rhythmic, warning glow over the expensive landscaping. The entire family turned to watch in stunned silence as the massive truck backed up expertly toward Fallon's SUV. A burly driver in a high-visibility vest hopped out, holding a thick metal clipboard, and began unspooling the heavy steel winch cable. "What is happening?" Fallon shrieked, sprinting across the patio toward the driveway. "Hey, get away from my car. What are you doing?" The driver ignored her entirely, hooking the heavy steel chains under the front axle of the luxury vehicle. "It is not your car, Fallon," I said, walking slowly toward the driveway, the crowd of relatives trailing behind me like a stunned audience at a theater. "It is a commercial fleet vehicle owned by my logistics company. I leased it out internally under my name, and I allowed you to drive it. But since you decided I am useless, I realized you would not want to be seen driving a vehicle provided by someone so pathetic. I canceled the internal lease this morning. The vehicle is being repossessed for violation of the authorized driver terms." Fallon stopped dead in her tracks. Her legs literally gave out. She collapsed onto the manicured grass, screaming and sobbing hysterically, begging the driver to stop. But the hydraulic winch whirred to life, and the front tires of the massive SUV were lifted brutally off the ground. The ultimate symbol of her fake, manufactured status was being dragged away in front of every single person she had ever lied to. Declan's face went from pale white to a dangerous, alarming shade of purple. He stormed toward me, his fists balled tightly at his sides. He looked like he wanted to strike me, but Uncle Hayes was right behind him, a silent, menacing shadow ensuring he did not try anything foolish. "You ungrateful, spiteful little wretch," Declan spat, his voice trembling with a rage so profound he could barely form the words. "You think you can come onto my property, embarrass my family, and steal your sister's car? Get off my land. Get off my property right now, before I call the police and have you dragged out of here in handcuffs for trespassing." I stood my ground. I looked up at the massive, sprawling brick mansion. I looked at the imported slate roof I had paid to repair, the custom windows, the grand entryway. I felt a surge of pure, unfiltered power rushing through my veins. "Your property?" I asked, tilting my head slightly, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of Fallon's hysterical sobbing. "Yes, my property," Declan roared. I reached into the very back of the manila folder and pulled out one final document. It was printed on thick legal paper, bearing the official embossed seal of the county clerk's office. I held it out toward him. "You might want to read the name on the deed, Declan," I said softly. "For years ago, When the bank was going to throw you out on the street for defaulting on your massive second mortgage, a private asset management firm swooped in and bought your distressed debt. You proudly told Aunt Naomi and your golf buddies that Fallon paid it off with her massive PR income. Declan stared at the paper in my hand, refusing to take it. His breathing became shallow, erratic. The firm is called M Logistics Capital, I continued, my voice carrying over the sound of the tow truck securing the SUV. I am the sole founder, the CEO, and the majority shareholder of that firm. You do not own this house, Dad. You have never owned this house for the past 4 years. You are a tenant. And unfortunately, because you failed to pay the market rate rent that was formally established yesterday, I had my attorneys draft this. I pressed the paper directly against his chest until he instinctively grabbed it. It is a formal 30-day notice of eviction and foreclosure, I said. You have exactly 1 month to pack up your fake lives and vacate my property. If you damage so much as a single light switch on your way out, I will sue you for everything you do not have. Declan's hands shook violently as he read the legal document. The reality of the situation crashed down on him like a collapsing building. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking hollow, old, and utterly defeated. My mother, Blair, let out a pathetic, wailing cry and sank onto a patio chair, clutching her chest as if her heart was actually breaking. The relatives began to quietly, awkwardly back away. The spectacle was over. The truth was out, and it was entirely ugly. Aunt Naomi was already walking quickly toward her car, not saying a single word of goodbye to my parents. The flying monkeys were scattering, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Whitmore Empire. Uncle Hayes walked up to me. He did not say a word. He just placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder, gave it a firm, proud squeeze, and walked away toward his old pickup truck. I looked at my parents, standing in the ruins of their own making. I looked at Fallon, sobbing in the grass as the tow truck drove away with her fake personality. I turned my back on all of them, walked to my modest sedan, and got in. I started the engine. As I drove down the winding driveway for the very last time, the profound silence radiating from the estate behind me was the absolute most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. The massive collapse of their fake empire did not happen overnight, but it unraveled with a brutal, predictable efficiency. 2 months had passed since the explosive Sunday barbecue, and my life had transformed entirely. The constant, suffocating pressure in my chest was gone. The endless anxiety about incoming bills, the dread of looking at my phone, the sickening feeling of being used, it had all evaporated, replaced by a profound, deep sense of peace. I was sleeping through the night for the first time in a decade. My savings account was growing at a staggering rate, no longer being siphoned off to fund country club dinners and designer handbags. I was sitting in a high-end downtown restaurant, enjoying a quiet, incredibly expensive steak lunch with Quentin, my wealth manager. We were celebrating a massive new commercial contract my leasing division had just secured. "You look remarkably well, Maeve," Quentin said, raising his glass of sparkling water. "The stress seems to have entirely melted off you." I smiled, cutting into my steak. "I feel lighter, Quentin. It is amazing how much energy you have when you stop carrying other people's deliberate mistakes on your back." Quentin chuckled softly, setting his glass down. "Speaking of mistakes, I assume you received the final legal notice regarding the civil suit your father attempted to file against you?" I rolled my eyes, taking a sip of my wine. "Yes. My lawyer sent me the brief on Tuesday." In a desperate, flailing attempt to maintain their lavish lifestyle, Declan had actually tried to sue me. He hired a cheap, aggressive attorney and tried to claim that the money I had given them over the years constituted a verbal contract for lifetime support, and that my sudden withdrawal of funds caused intentional emotional and financial distress. He also tried to contest the legal ownership of the estate, claiming I had manipulated him into signing the deed over to my holding company under extreme duress. It was a pathetic, laughable attempt at intimidation. "The judge threw the entire case out during the very first preliminary hearing," Quentin said, shaking his head in amusement. "Your father's attorney was practically reprimanded for bringing such a frivolous, baseless claim into the courtroom. The paperwork you had them sign over the years was airtight. The financial severance is permanent, legally and practically. What is the current status of the property? I asked, genuinely curious. I had entirely handed over the eviction process to a third-party property management company, so I would not have to deal with my family directly. They vacated the premises on the 28th day of the notice, Quentin replied, pulling up a file on his tablet. The property managers inspected the estate. It was left in surprisingly pristine condition. I suspect they were terrified of you genuinely following through on your threat to sue them for damages. The house has already been listed on the luxury rental market, and we have 2 very strong corporate applicants willing to pay above your asking price. And my family? Where did they go? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. I did not feel malice, but I did not feel pity either. It was just a morbid curiosity about the mechanics of their downfall. Quentin adjusted his glasses, reading from his notes. From what the investigative firm gathered for the legal proceedings, Declan and Blair were forced to rent a very small, 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial east side of the city. Their country club memberships were formally revoked due to severe non-payment. The remaining vehicles they owned were voluntarily surrendered to avoid further repossession marks on their ruined credit scores. And Fallon? I asked. Quentin offered a tight, grim smile. The luxury public relations firm officially dissolved, as it apparently had exactly 0 paying clients. According to the employment verification checks we ran for the lawsuit, your sister is currently working 35 hours a week as a hostess at a mid-tier chain restaurant downtown. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the restaurant window at the bustling city streets. The shift in power was entirely absolute. For my entire life, I had been the one wearing the grease-stained clothes, working the exhausting shifts, begging silently for a scrap of validation while they lived like royalty. Now, the natural order of the universe had violently corrected itself. Right on cue, my phone vibrated quietly on the white tablecloth. I glanced down at the screen. It was an incoming text message from an unsaved number, but I recognized the frantic, demanding tone immediately. It was Fallon. She had obviously gotten a new cheap phone after her expensive plan was disconnected. Maeve, I know you hate us, but the electric bill for the apartment is due today, and they are going to shut the power off. Dad's social security check doesn't clear until next week. I need you to send me $500. Just this once. Please. I am standing at the grocery store and my card declined for food. I stared at the message for a long, quiet moment. A year ago, I would have panicked. I would have felt a sickening wave of guilt wash over me, imagining my parents sitting in a dark, hot apartment. I would have immediately opened my banking app and transferred $1,000, just to be safe, just to be the good, reliable daughter. But today? Today, I felt nothing but cold, hard reality. They were adults. They had made a lifetime of terrible, selfish, cruel choices, and for the very first time in their entire lives, they were being forced to actually sit in the uncomfortable consequences. I tapped the screen, opening the message. I did not type a reply. I just let the read receipt trigger, showing her exactly what time I looked at her desperate plea. Then, I calmly blocked the number, slid the phone back into my purse, and went back to eating my expensive, peaceful lunch. They had finally learned exactly who the useless person in the family truly was. But as I sat there in the quiet luxury of my own making, a deeper question lingered in the back of my mind. Did destroying their fake reality actually make me happy, or did it just make me free? Part 11. The Final Message and Freedom. 1,400 words. The true closure did not come in a courtroom, and it did not come from watching my bank account grow. It came almost 6 months later, in the most mundane, incredibly ordinary setting imaginable. I was walking through the aisles of a massive, discount wholesale grocery store on a Tuesday evening, picking up supplies for a charity barbecue my logistics company was hosting for the local mechanics union. The harsh, incredibly bright fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, illuminating endless pallets of bulk paper towels and oversized boxes of cereal. I turned down the canned goods aisle, pushing my heavy metal cart, and froze. Standing a few feet away, intensely comparing the prices of 2 different generic brands of canned soup, was my mother. The contrast was shocking, almost unbelievable. Blair Whitmore, the woman who used to refuse to leave the massive estate unless she was wearing a silk blouse and full designer makeup, looked entirely unrecognizable. She was wearing a faded, oversized gray sweater and loose, cheap sweatpants. Her hair, usually perfectly blown out by an expensive salon, was pulled back into a messy, uneven clip, showing severe gray roots. She looked 10 years older, her shoulders slumped under the heavy, crushing weight of actual, real-world financial stress. She turned her head slightly and saw me. The generic can of soup slipped from her fingers and clattered loudly onto the linoleum floor, rolling away under a metal shelf. We stared at each other in the harsh, unforgiving light of the discount store. I stood tall, wearing a sharp, tailored trench coat over a high-end cashmere sweater, holding a perfectly crafted leather tote bag. The physical manifestation of our reversed roles was stark, brutal, and undeniable. She slowly bent down, retrieved the dented can of soup, and placed it carefully into her small, nearly empty shopping basket. She took a tentative step toward me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, deeply tired. You look very beautiful, Maeve," she said, her voice small, fragile, and completely devoid of the haughty arrogance that used to define her entire personality. "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady, calm, and distant. I did not move closer. I did not offer a hug. She looked down at her cheap plastic basket, then back up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Your father is working part-time as a greeter at the hardware store," she whispered, the shame evident in every syllable. "Fallon hates her waitressing job. She cries every night. We can barely afford the rent on the apartment, Maeve. The heating system is terrible." She paused, waiting for the old me to appear. She was waiting for the scapegoat to rush in, overwhelmed with guilt, and whip out a platinum credit card to fix the misery. She was waiting for a bridge, an offer of rescue, a return to the old, comfortable roles where she was the queen and I was the peasant holding the wallet. I gave her absolutely nothing. "You destroyed this family, Maeve," she finally said, her voice cracking, a tiny flicker of her old, manipulative anger trying to surface. "Are you happy now? Did ruining your own flesh and blood make you feel powerful?" I looked at her, feeling a profound, deep sense of closure wash over my soul. "No, Mother," I said, my tone incredibly gentle but completely immovable. "I did not destroy this family. I just firmly stopped being the expensive plaster that was hiding the massive, rotting holes in the walls. You and Dad destroyed this family the minute you decided my only value was the numbers in my bank account. You destroyed it when you laughed while my sister called me useless. I did not cause your downfall. I just stopped paying to delay it." I grabbed the handle of my heavy cart and began to walk past her. "Maeve, please," she sobbed quietly, reaching out a trembling hand. "Do not walk away. We are your family." I stopped, looking back over my shoulder one last time. "You were never my family," I said softly. "You were just an incredibly expensive habit. And I am finally clean." I walked out of the aisle, paid for my groceries, and walked out into the cool evening air. I loaded my car, started the engine, and drove toward the vibrant city skyline. I realized then that my revenge was not about inflicting pain. It was about reclaiming my own reality. Money does not buy love. It only buys leverage for people who want to control you. I was no longer the invisible workhorse. I was the architect of my own incredibly peaceful, authentic life. Some of my distant friends and a few extended relatives have told me that I was entirely too ruthless. They say that executing a foreclosure on my own parents and letting my sister fall into poverty was incredibly cruel, regardless of how terribly they treated me. They say family is blood and you should never let blood drown. But I chose to build a raft and save myself before they pulled me entirely under the dark water. So, I have to ask you all, am I the villain in this story? Was I wrong to finally shut the bank vault and let them hit the absolute rock bottom they created? Thank you guys so much for sticking with me through this crazy, emotional journey. If you felt empowered by the story, or if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to save your own sanity, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment down below and share your experience. And please, do not forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. See you in the next video.